Reform or Revolution by Rosa Luxemburg. Introduction. The title of this work might seem confusing at first. Can social democracy oppose reforms? Can we separate the fight for workers' rights under the current system from the bigger goal of revolution and ending unfair labor? No. The daily work to improve workers' lives and push for fairer laws within today's society is how social democracy fights for the working class. These steps are the way to reach the final goal, taking political power and ending wage labor. For social democracy, reforms and revolution are deeply connected. Reforms are the tool, revolution is the purpose. Edward Bernstein's ideas, shared in his articles Problems of Socialism, in Neue Zeit, 1897-98, and his book, Die Voraussetzungen des Sozialismus und die Aufgaben der Sozialdemokratie, The Prerequisites of Socialism and the Tasks of Social Democracy, argue the opposite. His theory pushes to abandon the end goal of revolution and treat reforms themselves as the ultimate aim. Bernstein summed this up clearly. The final goal, no matter what it is nothing. The movement is everything. But the final goal of socialism is what makes social democracy different from groups that accept capitalism. Without this goal, the workers' movement becomes just a fight for small fixes, not a true battle to overthrow the system. So, Bernstein's question, reforms or revolution, is life or death for social democracy. Arguing with Bernstein isn't about tactics, it's about whether the movement should exist at all. At first glance, this might sound extreme. Doesn't Bernstein talk about socialism? Doesn't he say he supports the same goals, just through different methods? Doesn't he claim to agree with social democracy's current actions? This is all true. Every new movement, when it first creates its ideas and plans, starts by building on what came before, even if it disagrees with it. At first, it uses the same forms and language as the old movement. Over time, the new ideas break free from the old ways. The new movement finds its own shape and voice. To expect opposition to scientific socialism to be clear and complete from the start, to openly reject the ideas of social democracy, would mean underestimating how strong scientific socialism is. Today, anyone who wants to call themselves a socialist while attacking Marx's ideas, which are some of the greatest human achievements of the century, must start by showing respect for Marx. They must call themselves his follower and use Marx's own words to attack him, claiming their attack is actually improving Marx's ideas. Because of this, we need to look past the surface of Bernstein's theory and find its true meaning. This is especially important for the working class members of our party. There's no greater insult to workers than saying, theoretical debates are only for academics. Long ago, Lassalle said, only when science and workers, these opposite sides of society, come together, will they crush all barriers to progress with their strength. The power of the modern workers' movement comes from its understanding of theory. This knowledge is even more important for workers now because they are the ones most affected by these debates. Their future is at stake. Bernstein's theory, which supports opportunism, is really an attempt to give more power to the middle-class ideas that have entered our party. It tries to shift the party's goals and policies in that direction. The question of reform or revolution, the final goal versus the movement, is really about whether the workers' movement will stay true to the working class or become more middle class. That's why it's so important for the working class members of the party to understand this debate with opportunism in detail. If only a few academics in the party understand the theory, the party risks losing its way. Only when the majority of workers take up the powerful tools of scientific socialism for themselves will the middle-class ideas and opportunistic trends disappear. Then, the movement will stand on solid ground. As they say, quantity will do it. Chapter 1. The Opportunist Method. If we think of theories as mental pictures of the real world, then, when we examine Edward Bernstein's ideas, we must acknowledge that sometimes these pictures can be distorted. Consider a theory that claims socialism can be achieved through social reforms, even when the reform movement in Germany had completely stalled. Picture a theory that argues for controlling trade unions. Think about a theory that insists most parliamentary seats can be won, even after Saxony changed its laws and recent efforts restricted voting rights. But the core of Bernstein's ideas isn't just about social democracy's daily actions. It's about his view of how capitalism develops, which directly influences his ideas on what social democracy should do. Bernstein says that capitalism is not likely to fall apart because it can change better and because the ways of making things are becoming more different. He explains that capitalism shows its power to change first when big problems stop happening. This is because of the growth of the credit system, groups of employers, better ways to communicate, and more information services. It also shows its strength in the steady middle class, which comes from many different types of work and from many workers moving up into the middle class. Bernstein also argues that this is proved by the better money and political situations of the working class, thanks to the work of trade unions. From these ideas, we can reach this general conclusion about the real work of social democracy. It should not use its everyday work to grab political power. Instead, it should work to make life better for the working class within the system we already have. It should not think that a big political or social crisis will bring about socialism. Instead, socialism should be built slowly by gradually increasing how society is organized and by slowly using the idea of working together. Bernstein thinks his ideas are not new. In fact, he believes they agree with some ideas from Marx and Engels. However, it is hard to say that his ideas do not go against the ideas of scientific socialism. If Bernstein's new way of thinking only meant saying that capitalism grows slower than people once thought, he would only be giving a reason for the workers to delay taking power, a point that everyone already agreed on. The only result would be a slower fight for power. But then the question comes up, how and why can we reach the final goal? Scientific socialism says that a socialist revolution is needed because capitalism grows more and more chaotic until it can go no further. But if we agree with Bernstein that capitalism does not move toward its own collapse, then socialism is no longer forced to happen by history. The other two main ideas of scientific socialism still remain. These are that production becomes more social and that the working class grows more aware of its own power. Bernstein has these two ideas in mind when he says, the suppression of the theory of collapse does not in any way deprive socialist doctrine of the power of persuasion. For, examined closely, what are all factors enumerated by us that make for the suppression or the modification of the former crises? Nothing else, in fact, than the conditions, or even in part the germs, of the socialization of production and exchange. Very little thought is needed to see that this leads to a false conclusion. What is the point of all the things Bernstein calls the means of capitalist adaptation, such as corporate alliances, the credit system, better communication, and the improved condition of the working class? They are important because they stop or lessen the problems inside the capitalist economy and prevent these problems from growing worse. Stopping the crises only means stopping the fight between making things and selling them on the capitalist stage. Improving the condition of the working class, or some of its members joining the middle layers, only means that the fight between capital and labor is made less strong. But if these factors stop the problems of capitalism and keep the system from falling apart, and that is why Bernstein calls them means of adaptation, then how can things like industry giants, the credit system, and trade unions also be the conditions and even, in part, the germs of socialism? They can only be so in the sense that they show most clearly the social nature of making things. By showing production in its capitalist form, these same factors make it unnecessary to change this socialized production into socialist production. That is why they can be the seeds or conditions of a socialist order only in theory and not in history. They are events that we know are connected to socialism, but in truth, they do not cause a socialist revolution. Instead, they make such a revolution unnecessary. There remains one force that supports socialism, the working class becoming aware of its own strength. But this force is not just a simple thought about the growing problems of capitalism and its falling apart. It is now just an idea that is persuasive only because people believe it is perfect. In short, this is the explanation of the socialist plan using only pure reason. In simpler words, it is an idealist explanation of socialism. The idea that socialism is needed by nature, that it comes from the way society grows, falls apart. Revisionist theory now faces a problem. Either the change to socialism is, as was thought before, the result of the inner problems of capitalism, and as capitalism grows, its inner problems will get worse and eventually cause its collapse, in which case the means of adaptation do not work and the collapse theory is right, or the means of adaptation really stop capitalism from falling apart and help it keep going by stopping its own problems. In that case, socialism is no longer a historical necessity. It might be called something else, but it is no longer the result of the way society grows. This problem leads to another one. Either revisionism is right about how capitalism develops and therefore the change to socialism is just a dream, or socialism is not just a dream and the theory of means of adaptation is wrong. That is the question in a nutshell.